Hey everyone, my name is Eric Bahn, and I'm one of the co-founders at Hustle Fund. And welcome to today's session, which we're calling Ask Me Anything, putting me into the hot seat. So I'm not sure if many people know this about me, but I'm actually a huge fan of Reddit. My favorite doom scrolling activity right late at night, which is pretty awful for my sleep, is just to lay in bed, scroll on Reddit, look at the funny memes. But my favorite format is actually the Ask Me Anything format, the AMA, because it's kind of a cool way of getting a biography of some interesting people. Not to say that I'm that interesting, but what we wanted to do with today's experimental AMA is just to open it up to you. So the format is going to be really simple. Whoops, I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. I'll kick things off in the AMA actually with a little bit longer biography than I normally do. Normally, I actually don't like to say too much about myself, but after kind of giving you a sense of who I am and maybe like starting with a common question that we often hear at Hustle Fund or I get posed a lot, we're going to open it up to you. So the format of the session is going to be really chill. If you have a question, go ahead and pump that into the Q&A section of this Zoom webinar. And we will, we will have my colleague Janelle, who is online with me, coming out into video and helping to moderate some of the questions and directing it my way. And I'll do my best. So that's pretty much it. Let me go ahead though and first send a huge shout out to our friends at NetSuite. If you've been a longtime follower of the series of monthly webinars that we put on at Hustle Fund, you'll know that we actually can't actually do this ourselves. It does require staff and editing skills and so forth. So we're enormously grateful that we have great partners like NetSuite who can make this happen. And I wanted to give you a sense of what NetSuite's up to. Startups in the early stages of growth often face more questions than they may have answers. And finding solutions requires access to accurate data and visibility into budgets, forecasts, and workflows. NetSuite is the world's #1 cloud-based financial platform, giving startups a solution that can grow with them every step of the way, providing tailored KPIs and automated financial operations so founders can make informed decisions, eliminate manual processes, and give investors an accurate view of business performance. Rapid implementation helps startups get up and running quickly, while built-in leading practices amassed over 20 years of experience provide the tools for building sustainable growth strategies. Visit netsuite.com to learn more about NetSuite's financial platform for startups. And I can share that after we've invested in 330 companies here at Hustle Fund over the last 5 years, many of our founders are happy NetSuite clients. So check out netsuite.com. Thank you so much, NetSuite, for making this happen today. All right. So let's go into it. I can't stand this slide, so I'm actually going to stop sharing at this point and just talk to you into the camera for this AMA. Again, like if you have a question, please go ahead and put it into the question and Q&A area of this Zoom format. We're going to try to get through as many of your questions as possible. Now, venture capitalists have a horrible habit of spending an inordinate amount of time introducing themselves and giving founders like 3 seconds to chat. When you're pitching them, for example. It's because it's an industry full of narcissists, and I kind of speak as one too. But I will give you a little bit more of my background because it might be relevant for today's session. So my name is Eric. Again, I'm one of the co-founders at Hustle Fund. And this is my real garage here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I can ride my son's little red bike if you want me to prove it. Don't put that in the Q&A, by the way, as a request. I spent a good chunk of my career actually as a founder, just like yourself. So I went to college here in California and then spent 15 years actually building media businesses. The first company was actually an education media business. It had a ridiculous name. It was called Beat the GMAT. At first, the reason why I started this company was I was graduating from college, and then I'll never forget this. I didn't really do that much in college besides smoke weed and play video games and have a great time. So I spent time well spent, I would say. But my grades were just mediocre. I was a spoiled, privileged kid, so I didn't even work in the summers. I had no job experience. It was a waste of time. And I remember I was about to graduate. I asked my mom, what am I going to do? I think I'm eminently unemployable right now. And she said to me in her Korean American English, Eric, you are too dumb to become a doctor or a lawyer. Why don't you actually consider business? So like basically like almost identically those words. And I think I was like laughing my ass off because I was just like, I can't believe my mom is shaping me like this, but she's giving me that loving truth, right? So I decided to apply to business school, and I actually consider law school and all that stuff, and actually went pretty far down that track, but like I didn't like it. And so the first step that a lot of people who apply to business school do is actually prepare for their GMAT exam. So if you're not familiar with the GMAT, it's like the SATs, or it's a standardized test for getting into business schools. And I started a blog called Beat the GMAT. Because I didn't have any money to take a test prep class or anything like that, I decided to study on my own. And I got some books from the library. I bought a couple books also from the local Borders bookstore that actually existed back in my day, bookstores, specifically that brand. And then I started preparing for the test, and I was blogging actually every day about what I was learning because I wanted to hold myself accountable. And I thought my girlfriend, who's not my wife, would look at it. My mom definitely looked at it every day, called me asking like why I didn't do it that well in that algebra problem, whatever. And then eventually, though, this became like kind of a viral sensation of 2005 for anyone who was applying to business schools, because there's a lack of self-study materials back then. And that eventually morphed into a forum that morphed into kind of like a miniature social network that we grew to 3 million users. And eventually that morphed into a data analytics company where we're providing business schools predictive analytics on what their applicant rounds are going to look like, even before the applications came in. Pretty amazing business, actually. Sold that in 2012 to the Daily Mail, a larger media business based in London. Had a great boss there. His name is Lord Rothmere, who's head of that group, like Harry Potter style, Lord Rothmere. And then, was having really fun with the education unit there. After that, took some time off. I had some experimental other kinds of small businesses that I ran, some that worked out really well, some that didn't. At one point, I was a product manager at Facebook, working on ads. That was an experience for sure. I didn't last more than 2 years there. And then we started Hustle Fund in 2017 after a couple of years of experimentation. So the fund at Hustle Fund, we focus on very early stage investments, working with teams in a unique way to help them on sales and customer acquisition. It's a really fun project. So that's kind of where I am today in the Bay Area, running a VC fund, still recovering from my time as a founder. I'm going to say a couple things about just like the founder experience before we really open it up. And again, I really encourage you, if you have any questions for me today in our open format AMA, to please put it in the Q&A section of this Zoom webinar. So the first is this, which is, when I was a founder, I think I can actually describe it in a couple like one word kind of descriptions. One was lonely, extremely lonely. You can have the most caring family and friends possible, but if they haven't had the experience of running their own business and being a founder, it's very difficult for people to understand what you're going through. And one of the problems I think with a lot of founders, including myself, and actually I would say even the majority of the Hustle Fund founders I see, is that it's hard to extract your own personal identity away from the business. And the problem is that businesses kind of fluctuate in terms of like urgency and crises and all that stuff all the time. So you sort of almost adopt like a manic kind of mood or mindset when it comes to approaching your life. At one point too, like I found myself doing troubling things like, should I go to this movie or not? Because, this is an opportunity cost if I go see this movie to spend 3 hours with my friends when I could be working for 3 hours, right? It just sort of came down to that kind of level. And I found myself being miserable. I think the other word I'd use for running a company is horrific. It was terrible. Even the companies that worked out well was awful. The reason why is that, you see every problematic tree in your forest with like such great detail. And there's always something that could break your house of cards that you're building, right? So others like outside of you or even on your team may have a better, like healthier forest using like actually the forest is flourishing. But as a CEO and founder of your own business, you start to obsess around like the things that are going wrong all the time. Now this is where like Janelle actually, by the way, wrote this really amazing newsletter to entice you to join today, which was like, Eric doesn't use heroin, but because like what I meant by that in a past interview was the times where it really does work out well in being a startup founder is like existential joy, right? I haven't tried heroin before, but I imagine it's like, pretty amazing. Don't ever try heroin. This is not, I'm not supportive of that. But, just like, it feels like, oh my gosh, I have like a direct line to God. Like, this is the reason why I'm on this earth, to solve this problem, right? And like those kinds of moments are what you live for. And I just never came close to that when I was working for other people or working at bigger companies, right? So that's, I think, like the one of the crazy benefits of being a founder, as many of you in this audience know today. So that was a little bit of my founder experiences. Loneliness is awful, but it was also addictive. I mean, I couldn't imagine living my life any other way. So I'll see just one more question to myself and then let's truly open this up. Okay, so here's like the second question. So this is the other question, which is like, why aren't you investing in my company? Right? I'm a great founder. I have a great team. This business is really great. How come Hustle Fund refuses to invest? This is a very, very tricky question. And it's not because I don't want to invest. In many cases, I do, but there's a really strange amount of conflicts of interest when you're working with a venture capital fund that you don't find with other forms of sources of capital. I'll give you an example. Let's say that I meet a founder, Janelle, and she's incredible, right? When you get to know Janelle, you already know she's incredible. But like, let's say she's like building a cool business and all this stuff, but it's in a market that is maybe a little bit more niche, right? So Janelle was like at one point a professional athlete. Let's say that she wants to create like a sports drink company for like curling, right? And like, but like it's great. Like, let's say she's like a multi-gold medalist, like curling athlete, and knows everyone in the curling world. And she's like a curling influencer. Okay, so there's like 100,000 people around the world who are like wild screaming fans of Janelle, who will buy basically anything that she wants. Okay, she's obviously really smart. She's got a lock on a market that's really important, but it may be a little bit too niche for a VC fund because of the way that venture capital mathematics has to work. So if I were to angel invest in Janelle's company right now, just personally off my own money, my family's money, and like Janelle were to like 10x or 20x it, like I give her $100,000 and she returns like $2 million back to me, I'd be like jumping for joy. I'd be like taking like my bench and just like, smashing against like the wall out of just like pure ecstasy of just like how great that is, right? Like what a payday, right? The problem with that though, is that doesn't really work for a VC fund. Because I am stewarding other people's money. They're called my LPs, limited partners. They're my investors. And we have a huge portfolio that we're investing across of. We actually need to get to a threshold where a deal has to reach about 100x or more in order to actually compensate for all the other deals that don't really hit those kinds of home runs or lose money for us. The way that venture mathematics works is so crazy that like you just have to swing super duper hard, which means you have to say no to great founders sometimes who are in markets that may not be able to support 100x outcome or more. And that's very difficult to communicate. And in some ways, like, I don't think actually VCs do a really good job at all, just even explaining how this stuff works at all. So it just comes off as super condescending, right? It's like, Janelle, you're a great founder, but this is a niche market. Maybe this is more of like a lifestyle business. They'll say stupid shit like that. That's like utterly insulting, right? When they should actually be explaining that like, there's actually a very crazy way that venture mathematics works. And like, we just have to hit this kind of formula every time. And it's just really unfair that sometimes we have to say no to great founders this way, right? So that's a really, really top reason why we have said no to you potentially in the past. But that doesn't mean that we're right. I could just, you could be hitting 100x. It's just like not something I understand or get at all. And it's possible that you're the only person who's right in the world, because of the Warren Buffett rule that I follow, which is if you want to make a lot of money in this life, you have to be both contrarian and right. And it turns out that the people who are most contrarian, building something really great for the world, just get it before anyone else does, right? And VCs aren't that smart, just in general. So stick with it if you find that kind of rejection, because you could end up still being enormously successful. Okay, I'm going to pause there with me just like bloviating for 15 minutes at you. And yes, Janelle, thank you for coming up. I would love to see if there's any cool questions that are coming through that we can start to address.
Eric, I just have to say that I got so excited about my new curling hydration sports drink mix, and I'm a little let down, but the way that you put it made it feel like not so bad of a letdown. I'll find that sports specific, actually curling specific VC yet. So with that, Eric, I would love to jump into the first question from the audience.
Yes, please.
This comes from Jess Ray. She is asking about how to sell herself as a founder when you don't necessarily have the traditional startup resume. For instance, what if you've been out of the workforce and are a full-time parent?
Great. So if you hear me typing, it's because I am not texting my wife about life. It's actually, I'm going to write this down so I can actually address the full question, Jess. Thank you so much for putting this out there. Let's get real here, okay? Which is, there is a okay, I'm going to answer this question in a very strange way. There's a lot of hype in the media right now that's saying, now is like the best time to raise. There's just so much capital floating around. It's like founders' choice in terms of just which money they want to pick among the pool of money. But if we are to be really honest about who's enjoying this, it's a very, very narrow group of men with incredible privilege. If you're like a white or Asian man who graduated from Stanford University with a computer science degree, worked at Google or Facebook, wear a green Patagonia vest with Allbirds shoes, live in San Francisco, yeah, great time to be fundraising. But guess what? It always was a great time to be fundraising because it is a very, very narrow phenotype and pedigree that has been selection biased into getting most of the reward. Does that mean that they're better founders than you, Jess? Absolutely not. And I want to be super unequivocal about this. Just because you have like a phenotype or pedigree that has been traditionally supported for funding, it doesn't necessarily mean that guarantees that those gentlemen that I just described have what it takes to grow something great. So I feel you, first of all, on like some of the potential biases that are kind of implied in this question, which is like, you don't have a traditional startup background, you're a mom, and that's totally fine. Now, I guess I gotta like answer the question in terms of like, how do you sell yourself? Well, I think there's actually a couple things that I would consider if I were in your shoes. One is because of the institutional gender biases and frankly, parent biases in venture. I don't speak for House of Fund. I actually do think that we're quite founder friendly in these regards. But because of that, if I were getting going for my initial tranches of fundraising, I would lean heavily on angels. So for a couple of reasons. One, angels can make their decision very quick. They're just like, Jess, you're badass, no problem, right? I want to make a bet on you. And that can be just like one meeting. And then you sign the Y Combinator safe on both sides and money gets wired tomorrow. Right. That's a really good outcome because it's fast decision making. The second is actually kind of ties to my exposition in the beginning, which is when you're an angel, you don't need to hit 100x threshold, even though your company might hit 100x. I mean, it's just like there's a lot more support for different kinds of founders who don't fit traditional patterns when you're an angel. Because angels don't have the same kind of institutional biases, I think, that they find in the venture realm. So my take would be like in your first or second tranches of capital, do this all through angels. It's okay to party round it up. You may even want to use like services like Party Round or AngelList to do an RUV, which is a roll-up vehicle where you can gather all these commitments into like a single vehicle that you sign off on as a single line item into your company. And then at some point, you will just be so good that people can't ignore you, right? If you do your business right and it's growing in the right ways. And if venture capitalists who want to write bigger checks like money, then they should be giving you money, right? So yeah, it's going to be challenging, but I do also think that this is a different era where non-traditional founders are finding more options too. It is getting better. Okay, I hope that answered that question.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric.
Yes, thanks.
So the next question comes from a founder outside of the US. This is from Alex. So when it comes to raising a round from both local investors, wherever you are, let's say it's Southeast Asia or Latin America or Africa, and investors in Silicon Valley or in the US, is there a preferred split between your local investors and international? And then part two is, how do you manage expectations from those local investors if you're in, let's say, an emerging market where they might have less knowledge about the domain?
Yeah, okay. Great question. And we do a lot of investing at Hustle Fund outside the United States too. So we have encountered this question pretty often. I would actually kind of, on the first part, which is like, I want to raise from both local as well as Silicon Valley investors. What's the preferred split? I almost like would flip that question back to you. Here's a way that I always sort of think about raising capital if I were outside, or just like in general, which is one, kind of tailing off of what we just mentioned with Jess's previous question. I would probably lean more towards angels in the beginning, at least. Okay. And maybe some founder friendly early VC funds. And there's many out there that are starting to form. But I would also like write down all my desired investors, including like mark those who have committed, and do almost like this Venn diagram exercise, right? Maybe there's like a handful who are really good at marketing and you want to turn them into like your marketing brain trust. A couple that are really good at product development, a couple are good at regulatory, a couple who are really good at fundraising. I'm not sure what it is. And, you can think of these as like respective different circles where they overlap is you in the center, right? So instead of like thinking of it in terms of geographical split, you may actually want to think of it in terms of skills fit, which is like, if I let Janelle in, I know that she can teach me everything about professional curling sports drinks, right? Versus Eric, who knows nothing, but can give me money and just seems to know like capitalists, right? So that's another way to think about the exercise. And in terms of like signaling, if that's the real question of like, should I have like certain mix to unblock like the next capital raise? If you're coming in pretty early, which I assume, I don't think I would really worry about that. Now, okay, the second part of the question, which is how to manage expectations of local investors. This one is trickier. Okay, so in Silicon Valley, or the notion of Silicon Valley at least, because what is location these days? Terms are generally pretty founder friendly. It's like, the way that we write checks at Hustle Fund is like, we just download the Y Combinator safe and then we sign and you sign. And that's basically it. Sometimes there's a side letter, but like, it's pretty straightforward. So there isn't a lot of complexity in terms of the deals that we write. Now, what I've noticed, especially for markets where they don't have a strong DNA around startups, is that most of the wealthy people tend to come from like real estate. All right. Now, the problem with real estate is actually it's not a real problem with real estate. Real estate is great. But like the problem with real estate investors is that they're used to all sorts of like warrants and caveats, and their deals are very complex to protect for downside. Right. So this is where you start to find like ridiculously stupid term sheets of just like, Janelle, I'm going to invest in your curling company, but I need to have like 5x liquidation preference, which means like my investment has a minimum 5x before you get cash, or just like, if there's like, if your company implodes, I have like a personal lien on your house as well. So like I can own your house if it fails or something. Like there's like these stupid terms in there, right? It's because though, this isn't a market that has matured into understanding that, the better way to make money is actually to just be super easy to work with and founder friendly over the long term. And so that I think is really important to understand, which maybe leads to like the advice. Sorry, I'm talking a lot today, which is maybe you actually should start by getting a few angels who understand the Silicon Valley ethos of being super founder friendly. So that like maybe in your first like $100,000 is comprised of angels who are just signing the Y Combinator safe. And therefore, when you then begin to engage with local investors, and maybe some of those people are local investors, frankly, it's an easier conversation to have. Like, we've already started to raise in this method, which by the way is like the standard by which you raise capital for high growth startups. And you can educate them a little bit and show a little bit of momentum that way. All right, I'll stop talking there, but hopefully that starts to answer your question.
Thanks, Eric. Now I'm kind of glad with those terms that you didn't invest in my curling hydration company.
Oh, I would be owning all of your bicycles and yeah, all that stuff.
No.
That cool giraffe in the background, that's mine. You know, that's the only thing I really want.
You're going to have to come to Bend and get it.
Okay.
Accepted. All right. Kind of a fun question here. If you could eliminate one thing from your day-to-day schedule, what would it be?
Okay. Just one. I mean, so I find actually that where I get a lot, I'll start give you like a philosophy in terms of how I'm trying to live my life right now. And I realize this is actually a position of privilege. So like I'm 40 years old now and made some money and then just like worked in some cool places. And I'm now running this business with Janelle. And the only thing I really want to solve for the rest of my career is to solve for joy, which means like the people who I work with, people like Janelle, Kara, who's also on here, and everyone else on my team are just people that I just really love, right? And then also when it comes to the founders that we work with, doing our very best to filter away the assholes, and then try to find people who are also are into vulnerability and being nice people too, and also very talented, right? And the same goes with my investors too. And I say largely at Hustle Fund, we've done a fabulous job of trying to solve for joy across our team and our broader team too, our investors as well as our founders, of course. So what I'm constantly trying to do is remove toxicity in my life. I've had to say goodbye to friends, even from college, that just seem to have a drag on my life. There are certain founders too that make it through our filters that are kind of assholes. It doesn't happen very often, but like what you find is that when there's that one individual on your team or just someone that you have to collaborate with, it starts to take like 20% of your mind share, right? So every day, like I'm trying to, first of all, shed meetings I don't like, but also just, longer term, I'm trying to shed people that I think are just toxic. And I'm kind of at a point where I don't ever want to reform anyone. I mean, it's really not for me. But if I can sort of filter down to just people that give me joy all day long, then that's a really good way to live life. So yeah, eliminate one thing day-to-day schedule is just meetings with toxic people. I'll try to distill it down to that.
Eric, that's
and there aren't that many
wonderful.
days like that anymore. Yeah.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. So you're optimizing for joy and trying to remove toxicity on a daily basis. That's awesome. Okay, next question. What are the first steps someone should take if they want a career in VC?
Yeah. So happy to answer this question. Again, a reminder for folks who might have joined us a little bit late, we're doing an AMA with me, Eric, at Hustle Fund. So feel free to pose any questions related to venture capital founders or even personal questions I love to answer, just to talk about journeys and things like that. So this is a great one too. So what are steps to get a career in VC? This is a really exciting moment right now in venture capital, because I would say that this is like the first time that I've witnessed in my career, being in Silicon Valley for about 22 years now, where a very different set of general partners and asset allocators are starting to have a real voice here. I would say that traditionally, if we look back maybe 10, 15 years ago, venture was really like homogenous. It's like dudes who look like me, but wearing Patagonia vests, right? From like great schools and largely finance backgrounds and consulting backgrounds and things like that, right? And like very few funds too, right? There are only like 50 funds that used to matter back in the early 2000s. Now there's thousands, right? So as a result, like of where we are today and how venture has evolved, we now see people who have really different kinds of takes on venture starting to do. I actually think Hustle Fund's one of those. Like we have a really weird model for how we work with founders. So there's a couple things that I would sort of think about when it comes to being a VC. One is that just embrace the fact that there is no traditional path anymore. It's not just like the Goldman Sachs bankers or McKinsey consultants that make it in here. It's people like myself too, who ran like small businesses, bootstrappers, those who have a really strong opinion on like the world that they want to see and I guess support. That's part one. Part two is this, which is perhaps like the best way to become a venture capitalist someday is actually to begin angel investing immediately. So let's talk about this for a second. Having some track record is going to be a very important part of your strategy when you're pitching to investors for a first fund. I'm trying to go back in time when we raised our first $11.5 million fund in 2017. There was a lot of just like talking about what we invested in, at what stage, how we got to know the founders and so forth. So if I were to get going, I would actually start by running really small checks. So how do you do this? First is like, okay, can you even write a check? You have to be an accredited investor to be an angel investor. So that means you have to have at least $1 million of liquid net worth, or make more than $200,000 as an individual per year for 2 years, or 300,000 as a couple over 2 years. Not everyone has that. So another path to doing this is actually become an angel investor by taking the Series 65 exam. You can buy a Kaplan book or whatever for $30 or something. Take this exam, which costs $150, which basically means that you have been educated and are now sophisticated once you pass it. It's a very easy test from what I can tell. To then go on, even as a non-accredited investor, to invest. You can look at, once you get there, you can look at, syndicates on Angel List. You can potentially join an angel community that we run called Angel Squad. Check out hustlefund.vc/angel squad, where we can serve up deals. Or you can actually just do your own hustling and try to find founders to invest in. And these checks don't have to be big. I mean, the smallest angel investment I've ever done was like $2,000. And if I had known what I know now in terms of my career in venture, I wish I had done like 5 $2,000 checks as quickly as I could have been able to start, just to start to build a portfolio. So I think that's a great way to show track record. And then I think the last is this: if you're trying to join a VC fund, and this is particularly, if you're trying to join a VC fund, I actually have like a very weird take, which is, I think the future of venture is going to be adding value through distribution. Here's what I mean by that. If you are a rising star and have like 100,000 followers on Twitter, or even 10,000 followers on Twitter, and people really care about your voice, and you can actually serve as like a distribution channel for the founders that you're serving to in your portfolio, that is a really unique value add, is like helping meaningfully to grow the businesses of your portfolio companies. So if I were starting cold, I would actually have emphasized Twitter way more. And Twitter, by the way, is where 1/3 of Hustle Fund's deals come from now. We see 700 deals a month. Easily 1/3 are from Twitter, and specifically Elizabeth, my co-founder, who has like 86,000 followers, right? So kind of some random shot pieces of advice there, but hopefully there's some nuggets that you can pull from. Be more active on Twitter. And then start angel investing as early as you can. Even small checks are great.
And Kara dropped in the chat a link to our Hustle Fund's angel investing community called Angel Squad. So if anyone is interested in learning more about Angel Squad, please check out that link that Kara shared in the chat.
Thanks, Kara.
Okay, next question is a combo from both Elton and Maisha. And Elton noticed that we kind of have a strong statement on our website that we invest in hilariously early startups. And the question is, can you enlighten us about what is considered hilarious? And Maisha's kind of add-on to that is, can you talk about how that ties into what our investment thesis is at Hustle Fund?
Yeah, thank you so much. Elton, Aisha, these are great questions. So what is hilariously early? I'd say that the very earliest that we come in is like at the idea stage, like that. It's like and that doesn't honestly happen as much as we can support. So, but like if it's a founder that we kind of have worked with before in the past and like have some track record, then yeah, like there's 2 deals right now that we're doing where they didn't even have a deck. It was just like talking to them saying like, I'm going to start this company, but we have a lot of trust. And that to me was a bit hilariously early in terms of the size of check. Usually, if we have a cold relationship from each other, we want to see at least a few conditions. One is that you have decided to work full time on this business. This, by the way, kind of tears me apart, this rule. But as a venture capital fund who is stewarding capital for institutional LPs and families, we think that actually crossing over to be full time on your company is an important way to filter those who are serious from those who are just dreaming. So the reason why it tears me apart, by the way, is because this is how I started my business, is part-time for 3.5 years, and how many of you have to as well. Because I don't assume many of you actually have like 2 years worth of runway to just like have the privilege of quitting your job to just like, dream about your company. It does tend to selection bias a little bit towards people who are already kind of a little bit wealthier further along in their careers. But it is a very intentional part of our strategy. And we are working on other kinds of vehicles in the future to support part-time founders. So being full-time is part one. Part two is this, which is, have they even shipped a prototype? So I think I don't want to come off as like super condescending. So just prepare yourself for a statement that might come off as like a condescending VC sitting in the garage with his arms like folded like this, like it's just like I do think that there's a very big statement that's made when a team is at least shipped some very, very early prototype of the product or service. Because again, there's many of those who are dreamers, and then those who are actually like showing that they have some level of execution. So if they're full-time onto this project and have actually shipped something, even if it's like a nasty, ugly version, but like something that like users can actually engage with, that I think is passes muster. So if you can fit those two conditions, then I think you're hilariously early enough for us to start to engage with us. And unfortunately, that is a really large category of founders. Now, in terms of our investment thesis, there's a mantra in our fund that you have to believe in order to work at Hustle Fund, which is that great hustlers look like anyone and come from anywhere. I'll repeat that because I'm super proud of this statement, because we 100% believe this, which is that great hustlers look like anyone and come from anywhere, full stop. Okay. And we think that this actually does inform, I think, our thesis, which is like, if you want to find greatness in founders, you don't actually necessarily find reliable correlations of greatness just because you went to a great college or worked at great companies like Google or whatever. But instead, we think that hustle is the very best leading indicator of success. For us, hustle is defined as great execution, means high velocity. Okay. And we find that teams that are really oriented towards measurement, very experimental, just constantly seem to be increasing their throughput of work week after week, month over month, year after year, tend to just grind out the best businesses over time. By the way, hustle, I'll tell you what hustle is not, because I just caught something, Janelle, that you kind of triggered. Hustle for us is not work your ass off for 15 hours a day, 7 days a week until you have no health and no family and you die alone, but rich, right? We absolutely do not subscribe to that kind of hustle porn of just like working your ass off pointlessly, right? Or maybe it's not pointlessly, but to the point where it's just like compromising everything in your life. The best people that we work with actually still have families, great relationships with their kids, their life partners, find balance, able to take trips to the Cascades, right? And I'm making fun of Janelle here because we were talking about Cascades earlier. And but they just seem to have crazy throughput for the hours worked. Some of the best engineers I ever worked with, I swear, only worked 5 hours a week. But during the 5 hours that they did work, it was like unbelievable what they were able to ship. And those are the kinds of founders that get me very excited. They just seem to have this ninja kind of quality when it comes to their throughput, but still have real lives. Okay, that was a little bit of side thesis. But in terms of like finding hustle, I actually think that it's impossible to do in a pitch. 100%. So like the reason why is like, if you're focusing on pre-seed stage investments, and these are people who are just like barely getting going with like a crappy product and like mostly just like a cool vision, it's very easy to fall into selection biases. Like, oh, this person's like really handsome, or just like, went to a really good college and all that stuff. And you're trying to like grasp at things because there's no like 5-year trailing data on like EBITDA or LTV CAC ratios, product market fit. Like that stuff comes later. So our view is that if we think we're curious about the team and the ideas and the market, let's just write a very fast, small check of $50,000. We do this in about 7 companies per month. Last month, we saw 700 deals and wrote checks at this level in about 7 companies. And then we want to work with you on a growth project, usually related to sales or customer acquisition. Kara is actually on the line here, and she's actually the founder of Redwood School, which is our school on customer acquisition and growth, which is now led by our awesome new teammate, Susan. And it's from this process of working with the teams on growth projects where we can get a much better sense of your operational efficacy, your market, your hustle, hopefully add a lot of value to and teaching you some real growth that can accelerate your business. But reciprocally, and more importantly, you're judging us to see whether we're actually a VC fund and team that are really helpful, responsive, good human beings. And if we find that we're really vibing, that we really like each other's hustle and are both excited about the market opportunity, that's when we'll concentrate and ask your permission to write second and third larger checks into your business, to hopefully make you one day a core position within our company. So that's our entire investment thesis. And it turns out that when you focus on hustle as your leading indicator of success, that great hustlers look like anyone and come from anywhere. Right now, our core companies are 40% women, naturally, 27% underrepresented. Every day, it looks more and more like the populations of the markets that we're serving. And they come from a diaspora of backgrounds, right? Okay, I talked so much. Let's keep going with some more questions here.
Eric, there are so many good questions. Okay, but I'm going to continue along those lines because you were talking about hilariously early, meaning that not only are they working full time, but founders have a minimal viable product of some sort. So this question came from Regina. How do you get your first few customers when those customers know that they're going to be the guinea pigs of the new product?
Yeah. Okay. I would like to tell a very quick story about a company that we're investors in Fund One. I can't name them right now. Yeah, I'm not going to name them. So they actually, Regina, I love this question because you're actually hitting the heart of the kind of founders that we like to support. Let me just start by sharing some context here. There's a tweet. I'm a venture capitalist, so we love Twitter. All right. There's a tweet many years ago by this guy named Justin Kan. He was a co-founder of Twitch, right? Bought by Amazon for like $1 billion or something. But his tweet was as follows. He said, first-time founders focus on product. Second-time founders focus on distribution. I'll repeat that. First-time founders focus on product. Second-time founders focus on distribution. And Regina, just even by the nature of the question that you are posing, you strike me as one of those second-time founder mentalities. What I gained from that kind of insight was like, if you've been in this game long enough, you realize that it just comes down to who's going to buy these products, right? And yes, it's important to have great technology. It's important to have great customer experiences, great product experiences. That stuff is important, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't have any passion for acquiring users or gaining sales too. So this is very important. And actually it's to the point where like, I actually would rather back a team that has a substandard product, but insane distribution skills. I'll tell you like a dream product example. Let's say that like a founder comes to me and is like, I'm going to create the next CRM that competes with Salesforce. And then the first thing I do is just like, oh my gosh, not this again. Like, no way this is going to be successful. But then the founder is like, but in my previous life, I was the executive vice president of sales at Salesforce the last 25 years or whatever. And I'm going to focus on this niche of CRM, which is huge. And I'm going to just call all 2,000 of my friends who I've been selling to for the last 2 decades to just come over. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like the greatest business ever. Because like this person just has such a crazy lock on the distribution, right? Now, how do you kind of kickstart this? Let me go back to the real story here. There's a company that we backed once. They're selling a $200 million product, okay? It's a hardware product. And what they discovered is that the world is divided into regions. There's like North America, South America, Europe, Africa, et cetera. And they found that like, within these regions is actually where the real competition happens. There are companies that are like in first position, second position, third position in terms of influence within each of these markets. And what they did was they took their product vision. At the time, that was just a deck, okay? And then they went to the number 2 person in each of the regions for this certain product. And they said like, hey, we have this offering and we're willing to give you a little bit of exclusivity where you get a 3-year head start within your region to buy our product, okay? And this is going to be unique where it can actually put you in a position to one day become number 1 in your region, right? And if you don't say yes to us, then that's cool. We'll just go to the number 1, right? It's a little bit of a natural FOMO. And what they did was they locked in $6 billion of pre-orders in their first 2 years, even before they started building the product. And they convinced each one of the people who bought to invest in the company on an uncapped note. An uncapped note is actually the most founder-friendly thing you can do, to the point where like it makes no sense for any fund to ever do it. It's basically saying like, I'm just going to give you money. There's no price or valuation to it. We'll just figure that out when you actually do raise out your first priced round, right? Like if like Tiger Global invests at like a $500 million valuation, then my investment of $20 million will convert at a $500 million valuation at that time, but I don't know where it's going to be, right? They raise an insane amount of capital and like close an insane amount of pre-orders this way. So like this kind of takes me to like the, let's call it the legal Theranos model, which is like, I'm a big believer in selling before you build, right? Now, not things like that actually have health outcomes. Like if Janelle's going to pitch me on like a cancer drug and like is totally lying about it, or just like, you know, it's really, really far away and she's missetting expectations, that's like straight up unethical. Janelle would never do that. Kara might though. I like making fun of Kara, by the way, because she can't speak right now. She's on the call with us, but sorry, Kara. but Kara would never do that. Just be on record, we're recording this. But like, you know, if you create like a landing page and that like shows the offering, and then you kind of position in a way like this is a closed beta, we're only going to take a limited number of customers. Sometimes you actually can make a couple of conversions and sales at that point to get you a little bit of working capital to get going, or at the very least to validate whether this is a company that could have some viability even before you invest in building. This is called fake door testing. You create like a landing page. It looks very convincing of like the actual end offering that you're going to build. You have a buy button. And when you click on the buy button, it takes you to like a waitlist page, right? And the only purpose of it is not necessarily to convert people at that time, although you can do that, but to actually track whether there's real demand behind it. So I think that's actually the first step, is like, I would do some fake door testing on fake landing pages on the concept. If you're finding that there's a lot of clickability and you're getting people on the wait list, try to do maybe a little bit of early conversion, and then maybe think about FOMOing people into like a closed beta, so there's a limited amount of spots. Okay, Regina, I hope that answers your question.
Oh, that was great, Eric. That, and the FOMO is real. But of course, selling ethically before you've built it, right? Okay. So this comes from a young founder in the audience. So Griffin is looking for some advice on what it is like to be a 20-year-old or slightly younger founder, and how to compete against potentially older founders when you're going into the pitch. Griffin feels like they're running into a problem where potential investors don't believe the numbers that their startup is producing at these early stages.
Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you a fun fact here. I'm super proud of this. The youngest investor that I have ever invested in personally, not through the fund, but personally, is 14 years old. Okay. This guy did a Zoom pitch with me in his high school's bathroom. I heard people peeing and flushing toilets when he was talking to me. Okay. Now, what was it that really compelled me to invest? It actually wasn't his idea, which I didn't find to be like terribly like unique yet. Although I think it had legs. I'm not going to out him. It was legit, but I didn't find it like terribly unique. It was him. It was just like, I just loved the sheer audacity of this young kid that he was able to pitch in a bathroom. He basically faked that he had horrible diarrhea to his teacher to take the call with me, and was gone for 25 minutes pitching me, right? So that I'll give you a little bit of credit for. But the second was just like the way that he sort of like addressed my questions was really great. So I always test for 5 things when I'm like listening to a pitch: is team, problem, solution, market, and traction. Is this a team that actually has credible background and skills to solve in the given market? Is it a problem that actually the founder has demonstrated lots and lots of customer discovery, right? Showing like, oh, I've talked to like 100 people that have this problem, and like, here's like the resounding like evidence behind this. Is the solution, is there like some sort of early prototype that I can look at that gives me a sense that this is a team that knows how to build? The market, is this a market that I think can grow into a really, really huge size? Again, as a VC fund, we want to see 100x. As an angel, I have a lower threshold. basically not losing money. And then traction, like what kind of early user acquisition can this person point to? And if the answer to those 5 questions are pretty clear and you have like a strong thesis behind them, or even like one of those pillars is missing, but you have like really clear sense of this, of like how to achieve the answer, that's good enough for me. So yes, there is some level of age bias, but I think that to be clear, 20 isn't that young. There have been examples of great founders that started that young, right? Mark Zuckerberg, I guess, but like, well, although greatness is a little bit disputable sometimes, but like, so he made a lot of money. So I think that's that part. Part 2 is just like, I don't know, like if older founders necessarily have that much more advantage. Now, yes, like if they have track record and they're serial founders and so forth, that's great. But again, like to make a lot of money, you gotta be both contrarian and right. And sometimes taking the bet on the scrappy team that just has a unique and possibly even somewhat naive take on how to solve a problem is better. Because the older that I'm getting, the more that I'm finding myself typecasting like problems into certain rails of just like, oh, I've seen this thing before. Oh, I've seen that thing before. And I've discovered that like, that's actually kind of the worst part of aging for me personally, is that like, I can't accept as quickly that there are people that have a different perspective than mine, that is, and like a totally different kind of route to solving a problem that is potentially better. So that's something that I constantly check myself on with my therapist of like, how do I make sure that I'm not turning into these like craggily old dudes? So just know that like your situation is not unusual, but the way I think to cut through the noise is be very ultra clear on team problem solution market and traction, that you can just like answer that decisively, succinctly. And it's okay if there are older founders in your space that are competing. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win. And there are many examples of that too. Okay, that's my answer.
Oh, sorry, Eric. Did that 14-year-old founder use a pitch deck in that 25-minute bathroom pitch?
Great question. The answer is no. I almost always insist, and this is an unusual quality of Hustle Fund, we almost never see a pitch deck in a pitch. I generally like to see it after the pitch, right? It's like, Janelle pitched me, but we talk like humans. Like, in fact, like we have a whole video on this, by the way. If you search for us on YouTube, search for Hustle Fund. And I am a strong believer that you never should use a deck. That's my take. The reason why is I don't want this to ever turn into a situation where it's just like you standing presenting and like people are just seeing like slides, not paying attention to you. When it's just like this, it feels like we're having a conversation. It feels much more level, right? And you want that kind of like even power dynamic. The deck, I think, is helpful to send afterwards when you want to send them references of like, by the way, great conversation. I wanted to just send you a deck for like a reference, and then you follow up with them that way. So this kid was literally sitting on a toilet with his laptop and his AirPods talking to me, pretending he had diarrhea. Pretty amazing, right?
That's pretty, yeah, that's amazing. And I'm sure you didn't get a screenshot, but it could have been a pretty good Twitter post to some degree.
Janelle, I can't take a screenshot of a 14-year-old boy in a bathroom.
Okay, sorry. Maybe he should have done it and it could be part of his founder journey somewhere.
There you go. Yes, he should take his own selfie someday and these kinds.
That's right.
I'll talk to him later about this.
Yes. You can have him on First Pitches someday. And
there you go.
Tell that
Let's
story.
Do that. Right.
Okay. Next question, and oh my gosh, we only have 7 more minutes, so I don't know how many questions we'll get to, but next question. So this comes from Zach, and he is asking about the wins that you celebrated as a founder in your really early days, but he specifically asked about the non-fundraising wins. So just the other wins that you were able to celebrate as you were starting this part-time and on your own.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that actually made me realize I was going to be a founder when I received my first check from a vendor for my services. And I have a really fun story behind this. So this was in 2007, where I began to really monetize my first company, Beat the GMAT. I was like 2 years into the business. And I remember one day receiving this check for $3,318. And at the time I was like, this is an insane amount of money, because it was. And it is still. Actually, that's like a meaningful amount of money. And you'll never guess who actually was the person that signed that check. It's a man that eventually ran for president, came kind of close. His name is Andrew Yang, right? So Andrew is kind of like I don't know if you heard of him. He ran as a Democrat, got kind of close-ish. So, but like, because I felt like that was my first believer. I mean, that actually gave me an insane amount of confidence of like, I think I can do this, right? That's, I think, part one. And then maybe like another thing that I really celebrated was just like the moment that we were able to break even, where like my expenses for the month and then the revenue coming in was there. And I was like, I actually am now free. I can actually do this with my team for as long as we want, right? And that was a crazy milestone that took 4.5 years to get to. And I'll tell you actually what was celebrated, but then really quickly anticlimactic was my first acquisition, the first company that we sold. Amazing high, but the next day felt hollow, because I thought that like this thing was going to just like fix all of my problems, and that like I'll just be magically much more happy when I've been so miserable for 7.5 years building this company. It was good misery, beautiful agony, I think, is like a great way of thinking about it. But the next day I was just like, well, I got more money, but I'm not happier for some reason, right? It took me probably 8 years to work on myself afterwards to get to a place where I feel like I feel a lot better, right? So just want to leave it with that. But let's try to get through some other ones. Thank you, Zach, for that question. Maybe we can one or two more before we have to cut it off today, Janelle.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. So this question comes from Dave. When and how should you decide to pull the plug on your startup if you need to?
Oh, man. Yeah. Thank you, Dave. This is a really hard one. So there's a few things that I'll sort of say. In my experiences, I've started maybe 5 companies, and maybe 3 that worked out, 2 that didn't. And I'd say that like there's a 1,000-day rule that I once heard that I feel like really does apply, which is not to say that you have to stick to 1,000 days, but it really did take me 1,000 days for the companies that did work out to really start to hit that escape velocity where I was just like, okay, I think I found something repeatable here that can grow for a long time. So, you know, it just takes time sometimes to just really validate it. And it's not to say you can't know it sooner than later, but a couple of reasons to when to pull the plug and how is, one is you just completely lost passion for the business. You know, if you're just showing up every day and it's just drag, you can barely get out of bed, you're taking like depression naps, you're self-medicating with like weed gummies every night, and like your relationships are suffering. It's not worth it. Even if the business is working, like if you're just miserable, you should just probably shut it off, because you're going to kill yourself. Literally, right? I mean, like your cortisol level is so high that you're probably gonna give yourself an early heart attack and die. And that's not worth it. I think part 2 is this, which is you're seeing zero market pull. So you have a great product, great team, everything's out there, but there's just no demand, right? And you've run your experiments for a good amount of time to try to position this company in the right way, but just no one really cares. And you're seeing this in just like flat sales for like more than a year or 2 years, whatever it is, right? That might be another one. I'll say this, and this is very self-serving. It is very classy to return at least some capital to your investors if you do decide to pull the plug. I will never hold it against the founder if she or he has to return nothing, right? I get that, and that's part of this game. But even if it's like $1,000 returned, it is such a kind gesture that founders who do that return some capital back when they're shutting down, whatever extra capital remains, is a great way of preserving relationship and optionality for the future. So I know that was a little bit vague, but I'll sort of leave it at that. Janelle, I think we are actually at, oh, wait, one more.
One more, because we know the founder journey can be such a challenging one. Any tips for how founders can connect with one another and lift each other up?
Oh man, I love this. So okay, a few things. Like one is like if you're working on an early company that where you think Hustle Fund could be an interesting partner, we definitely encourage you to go to hustlefund.vc and click on the "What are you hustling" button. Would love the opportunity to learn about what you're doing, and that is actually the way that you engage with us, is through that website form. And some of our best companies have come in cold in our history. If you do join us, there's a great founder community, 330 companies, over 700 founders who are actively engaging with each other. Other than that, you may want to try to look at some like specialized Discord servers, or possibly even some like founder DAOs that are kind of like pseudo-anonymous, to share some of these ideas. I think that loneliness really can help be mitigated in those kinds of communities. And then last but not least too, is just, I do think that even though we're in a remote world, it is important to have in-person fellowship. So if there is a local community where you can even just do like every other week or monthly drinks or coffee, or just like a lunch, where you can just like set a social contract of like, this is not tweeted, this is not shared, it's just private stuff, where we can actually really relate to each other. Founders really like helping other founders, right? It's just like part of the karma of this industry that's so wonderful. So I do encourage you to try to organize and see whether you can get some of that too. Okay, well, let's go ahead and wrap up because we're basically out of time here. So I just want to remind you that you can go on YouTube and search on Hustle Fund. We're going to be posting a recording of this video today into our YouTube channel. So check it out. There's a lot of cool videos there. And then the final shout out to NetSuite. Thank you so much for your support for today's session. And then a big final thank you to you. I really appreciate your spending an hour with us. Hopefully we're able to get to as many questions as you can, some things you were able to take away and learn too. But I'm really grateful for your time and hope to see you at a future session, and maybe even learn about your company if you check out hustlefund.vc. Thanks so much. Stay safe.